sends destroyer near Paracel Islands, angering China. The U.S. says sailing near disputed islands was a freedom of navigation operation, while China calls it illegal. The United States has sent a ship through the northern southern China Sea near the disputed Paracel Islands in a move condemned by China. The USS Benfold traveled near the archipelago of more than 100 reefs and islands, which are occupied by China and claimed by Vietnam and Taiwan in a freedom of navigation operation. The U.S. said was necessary to assert rights and freedoms under international law in disputed waters. Unlawful and sweeping maritime claims in the South China Sea pose a serious threat to the freedom of the seas, including the freedom of navigation and overflight, free trade, and unimpeded commerce, and freedom of economic opportunity for South China Sea littoral nations, the U.S. 7th Fleet said in a statement on Wednesday. Beijing, which took control of the Paracel's Woody Island in 1955, reacted angrily to the presence of the U.S. destroyer. Woody Island is the most prominent feature in the island chain, and China has built an airport and other facilities there. On July 13, the U.S. guided missile destroyer Benfold illegally broke into China's Paracel territorial waters without the approval of the Chinese government. Tian Junli, the spokesperson for the Chinese military's Southern Theater Command, said in a statement. The move seriously damaged the peace and stability of the South China Sea and seriously violated international law and the norms of international relations, Tian said, according to Reuters news agency. Tensions have been simmering for years in the South China Sea, with China claims almost in its entirety. Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines have also claims on the waters. Manila lodged a legal challenge over Beijing's actions in the sea in 2013, and the court in The Hague ruled 3 years later that China's claim had no basis in law. Beijing has refused to recognize the decision and says its so-called historic rights on which it bases its claims of sovereignty predate the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. UNCLOS sets out what countries can claim from various geographic features at sea and also governs maritime behavior. China and the Philippines are among the 167 parties that have signed and ratified UNCLOS. The U.S. has not ratified the legislation but recognizes the instrument as international customary law. In its statement, the U.S. Navy 7th Fleet noted that China, Taiwan, and Vietnam were all in breach of international law by requiring either permission or advance notifications before a military vessel or warship engages in innocent passage through the waters around the Paracels. It said the sailing by the USS Benfold was a challenge to such unlawful restrictions. NATO has listed China as one of its strategic priorities for the first time, saying Beijing's ambitions and its coercive policies challenge the Western Bloc's interests, security, and values. The document directed its harshest language towards Russia, which it described as the most significant and direct threat to the alliance's peace and security, but said Beijing's military ambitions, its confrontational rhetoric towards Taiwan, and its increasingly close ties with Moscow posed systemic challenges. China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors, threatening Taiwan, monitoring and controlling its own citizens through advanced technology, and spreading Russian lies and disinformation, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters. China is not our adversary, he said, but we must be clear-eyed about the serious challenges it represents. In response, China on Thursday said it firmly opposed NATO's declaration, calling it a completely futile warning. The official turn by NATO puts the world's largest military alliance, based on the United States Armed Forces, on guard against China, which has the world's second largest economy and a rapidly growing military, both in numbers and in top-notch technology. One of the things that China's doing is seeking to undermine the rules-based international order that we adhere to, that we believe in, that we help build, said U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and if China's challenging it in one way or another, we will stand up to that. Western leaders are concerned that Russia's aggression in Ukraine, which China is yet to condemn, could embolden Beijing to be more assertive over Taiwan. China considers Taiwan a part of its territory, with no right to independent recognition as a state or representation on the world stage. Speaking at an event in Madrid that was not part of the NATO summit, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said that unless China is checked, there is a real risk that they draw the wrong idea, which results in a catastrophic miscalculation, such as invading Taiwan, referring to the self-governing island that China claims as a province. Marcin Jarzewski, head of the Taiwan office of the European Value Center for Security Policy, told Al Jazeera that NATO members may also be concerned about Chinese-Russian military cooperation on Russia's oft-forgotten Pacific coast. Before the war in Ukraine, Putin began pursuing his own pivot to the east by ramping up economic development and his military presence on the Pacific coast. This is an important step for NATO and, in a way, a sign that NATO is waking up to a new geopolitical reality, which is largely defined by the growing confluence of Russian and Chinese strategic interests. Jarzewski said, Russia has been viewed mainly as a source of threats in the European theater, but that view ignores Russia's physical presence on the shores of the Pacific. It was the first time that the leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand are invited to a NATO summit. They participated in a NATO session on new global challenges after holding a side meeting outside of the summit.